Might be best to try and leave questions till the end, although I might at some point think about what the answers might be to various things. Sorry for the really bad pun, although it looks like a misspelling. But to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, we'll have a look at some figures that the World Health Organization have on their main website. So next slide, Simon, please. So this is just a screenshot from their figures on their site, which shows that back in 2022, 1 in 8 people were living with obesity, but almost half of the world's population were classed as being overweight. And it's obviously a growing problem in childhood as well, which I'm sure you're all aware of. I'm sure you're also aware that increasing. Next slide, please, Simon. So if you look at these 6 photos, they all have something in common. So smoking cigarettes, taking heroin, barbiturates, gambling, alcohol, and chocolate cake. So what do they all have in common? Yeah, so they're all addictive. Next slide. Oh, yeah, next slide, please. This one is a warning. So at this point, I must tell you that there are various images that will make you feel more hungry. So you can protect yourself either by leaving or by simply closing your eyes for the entirety of the talk. So anyone want to do that now? Give you a moment to make that decision. Okay. So if you're willing to take the risk, let's carry on. Next slide, please. So chocolate fudge cake, some fudge and some chips with tomato ketchup in it. What do they all have in common? Yeah, well, all food is composed of either carbohydrate, fat, or protein. But being more specific about and what do they all? Sugar, yes, and sugar and what else? Fat, yeah. So sugar and fat. So there's quite a lot of sugar in tomato ketchup. You don't get fish and chip shops selling tomato puree, which obviously would be low in sugar. So next slide, please. And if I ask you, if you have 3 choices, if I ask you to try and consume 1 kilogram of sugar cubes, or 1 kilogram of cream, or 1 kilogram of ice cream, so hands up who would want to go for the sugar cubes. Okay, hands up who would go for the kilogram of cream. Okay, yeah, that's fine. And hands up who would go for the kilogram of ice cream. Okay, and that's and yet, if you mix sugar and cream, you essentially get ice cream. Well, yes, of course, you've got to cool it, but that's basically what ice cream is composed of: sugar and cream. So, I think, well, what is it that why do we like the mixture so much more than the individual components? I won't ask you to answer that just yet. And next slide. So, how many of you are aware of these 2 types of eating, or even heard of homeostatic and hedonic eating? Anyone ever heard of that before? I must say, I haven't since I was preparing this talk, but it does help explain a little bit about what I'm going to talk about later. So homeostatic eating, homeostasis is basically how the body looks after itself. So it's what you call normal hunger. So that's the response to needing energy, needing nutrients. And our brain is very good at sensing that. Part of the brain called the hypothalamus is the main area that senses it. And we have 2 hormones that are the most important, one called ghrelin, which I could never pronounce, and leptin, which is produced by fat cells. And hedonic eating, so hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure, and hedonic eating is just that. So we eat because we like it, even when we've had enough calories, even when we don't need the nutrients. And it's more involved with the emotional part of our brain. So the limbic system, or the mesolimbic system part in our brain, is the emotional part. And that is mainly responsive to a hormone called dopamine, or a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And also in the brain, we essentially produce our own heroin in the brain. Endogenous means we produce it ourselves. And those opioids, or our own morphine, is also released when we consume various foods, particularly food that contains fat and sugar. Next slide, please, Simon. And the studies have looked mainly at what happens in our brain when we eat food containing high fat and high sugar. And most of the information has come from studies in rodents, in mice and rats. And if you give mice or rats unlimited access to food containing fat and sugar, they eat a lot more and gain a lot more weight. But if you give them access to unlimited sugar, they don't gain anything like as much weight. Unlimited access to fat, they don't gain anything like as much weight. Why is that, you might wonder? Next slide, please. So that same article actually details a lot of research that's been done. It's a very recent article published this year. Main thing in the short term is the release of dopamine as the reward hormone, which I mentioned as part of hedonic eating, and opioids. In the long term, though, we get a down-regulation of the receptors for those hormones. So we end up needing more dopamine, a bigger dopamine hit, to get the same amount of pleasure, the more we have of it. So the more food containing sugar and fat we eat, the more we have to get the same amount of pleasure. And that's exactly what we see in other substance use disorders, like heroin or nicotine. And so this article says that sugar-fat addiction, which many of us have, has the same craving, tolerance, and loss of control that you get with heroin addiction. I mentioned the satiety hormone leptin, the one that's increased or produced by fat cells. When produced, it's supposed to make us feel less hungry. But people who gain weight, the more weight they gain, usually they become resistant to that hormone. So they develop leptin resistance. And a lot of drugs nowadays are often aimed at trying to reduce that leptin resistance. Next slide. Saying that, if as a GP, I wanted to really help someone with losing weight, probably the best thing is not to mention their weight, not to even take it, not to talk about all the problems associated with it either. There's this article in this last month, so in January, in the BMJ mentions. What we really ought to be doing is examining the root causes of hedonic eating. Why does someone need to eat foods containing sugar and fat to make them feel better? And if we tackle that and stop blaming them for being fat, stop pointing out that they are fat, we might actually get much better results. Any problems with the sound?
Just done myself out of the job. If you press right, there's your slide.
Okay, I'll have a go anyway. So a couple of questions that this article in the British Medical Journal suggests for all GPs to ask are simple ones. What does your job involve? Who can you rely on your life like now? What's your life like? Rather than going straight to the scales or asking, would you like to lose weight today? Oh, point it that way. Okay. This slide is just to remind me that of course, choice and variety of food does have an impact. Saying that though, from a personal experience, I know a few months ago I decided I was going to give up dark chocolate mixed with hazelnuts because I kind of became addicted to them. I found that I could literally eat an entire bar of it Anyway, and there's no variety involved in that. So, okay, next slide. So, there are lots of examples of where we create these sugar-fat mixtures. So, who likes applesauce with a pork fat? Hands up if you do. Okay. Who's ever found, as I do, that after one pork fat with applesauce, I feel hungrier, and I actually need a second one, if not a third one, to actually feel full? Anyone ever felt hungry after just one? No? Anyway, I certainly do anyway, so perhaps I'm the odd one out. But who likes cranberry sauce with their turkey? Anyone? Or does no one have cranberry sauce with their turkey? Okay. So the rest of you just have it dry, or you have something else with it. And when it comes to having duck, orange is the classical thing. But of course, there's no reason why we should have these. We shouldn't just mix up these sweet things. We've just got used to having apple with pork. We've got used to having cranberry with turkey. We've got used to having orange with duck. There's no reason why we shouldn't have a different sweet substance with it, with each of those types of meat. Everyone heard of peanut butter jelly sandwiches from America? They call it jelly, we call it jam, of course. I've never tried it myself, actually. But has anyone actually been to America or even tried the peanut butter and jam sandwich? What does it taste like? Okay, brilliant. And one combination you may never have tried, which I love, is mashed banana and peanut butter on toast, or even on fresh bread. So you've got the sugar in the banana, and you've got the fat in the peanut butter. And if you haven't tried it, have a go. I personally think it's delicious anyway. And it's Shrove Tuesday tomorrow. So who would normally have just lemon juice and sugar in their pancakes? Okay. Yeah, okay. Does anyone try anything else in their pancakes? Okay, generally just something sweet. Does anyone ever have a combination of something sugary and fatty in it? Nutella. Oh, right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of Nutella. But in fact, so I make a lot of pancakes, not just on Shrove Tuesday. It's one of my favourite snacks. And probably because two of my favourite fillings are sugar and fat combinations, which are highly addictive. At least they certainly are for me. So if you've ever tried melted brie and chopped grapes, or melted Roquefort blue cheese with grapes, I'd highly recommend it. It's something that if I ever get asked to make some food for a party, I tend to make that, chop them all up, take them on a plate, and they go really quickly, even though people have never tasted it before. Another combination which I really love on Shrove Tuesday is mashed banana and melted dark chocolate. By the end of it, of course, the dark chocolate is no longer dark because it mixed in with the banana. But it might not sound nice, but it is delicious. And everyone I've ever given it to has loved it. How you cook your food is important. So why am I putting up a picture of 3 vegetables as an example of a sugar-fat combination? So what reaction? Sorry? Maillard reaction. Oh, yes, well done. Sorry, I didn't actually know the name for that. Very good. Yeah, so obviously, normally it would be cooked in some form of fat, both of them, some kind of oil. Normally the fat's taken from a roast. But carbohydrate, when it's heated up at very high heat, it caramelizes the Maillard reaction, which I I'd forgotten them now. So there's and who who knows which one tastes sweetest of the three, or normally? Right? Yes. Yeah. So for me personally, roast carrots are the most addictive of the three. Um, and uh, people who want to sell food, chefs, people who want to write a cookery book, restaurant owners, if they want people to come back and eat their food, they will very often have some form of sugar fat mixture involved. And when it comes to sugary drinks, we can understand why a sugary drink in the mouth at the same time a mouthful of chips might stimulate your appetite because you've got both sugar and fat. But what about a diet-free Coke that has no sugar in it? What do people think that could stimulate appetite if you're having while you're having your chips? So why might that be?
Because artificial sweetness due to the sense, because you have the sense of sweetness from an artificial sweetener, which is based and interprets as a sugar, so you get the same response.
Yeah, exactly that. Because it's down to our brains.
Yeah.
It's our brains. Yeah. It's the limbic system in our brains. It's the hypothalamus in our brains that are involved with appetite. Yeah. Yeah. So strangely though, if you look at the literature, not much has been done on how artificial sweetness can stimulate appetite. So I think certainly people should be aware that just because they think that they're having a 0-calorie drink, that 0-calorie drink could really be driving their appetite without them even realizing. In fact, how many people were aware of that? Okay. How many people were not aware that having a 0-calorie drink could stimulate their appetite? Okay. Only one person prepared to admit it. Okay. Because a lot of doctors aren't aware of that. So in that case, you're all doing better than a lot of doctors. Okay. So back in prehistoric times, did we have a lot of food containing both fat and sugar in the same food source? Yeah. So have a think of the kind of foods that prehistoric man would have eaten. Don't shout out the answer though. Okay, so if you can think of the answer, keep it to yourself. Have a think. Can you name one food item that prehistoric man would have eaten that contains both fat and sugar? Okay, so we've got one person who's knows. Two. Okay. So obviously we didn't have ice cream, just in case you were wondering. Next slide. So Charles Darwin came up with his theory of evolution, and a core part of the theory of evolution is natural selection. And that's a screenshot of the dictionary definition of natural selection. The process whereby organisms become better adapted to their environment, they tend to survive and produce more offspring. So if we are going to be addicted to something, or have a propensity to be addicted to something, it needs to provide, or it should have provided a survival advantage to prehistoric man. But how, if you're all struggling to think of a food that contained both fat and sugar, why then did prehistoric man become addicted to fat and sugar? Why not become purely addicted to fat or purely addicted to sugar? Why become far more addicted to the combination? That's the extra clue to try and help you think of that one food that prehistoric man was eating that led to selection for that. So nuts would only mainly contain fats. So still only one, you're the only one. Oh, two, sorry, we have two. But three, okay. Do you all want to shout out the oh, hang on a second, before we do that, let's one more big clue. And then, okay. If it moves on, that was the up arrow, isn't it? Okay, so a big clue. Okay, so, and I probably misled you because I said food. And food is a bit misleading, isn't it? Because we don't tend to think of a liquid as food. But for a baby, it is food. And in the guts, milk becomes a solid anyway. It turns into curds and whey. It becomes solid. And humans are mammals. We are no different from other animals. And if you think of the survival advantage that might be conferred to a baby that is more addicted to drinking milk from mum than their brother or sister. So there's a child that insists on more milk from mum and gains weight faster would expect in prehistoric times to be more likely to survive than a child that, I don't know, sometimes wanted to feed and sometimes didn't. You're right, I keep on forgetting this. Okay. So back almost 10 years ago now, I published that very idea in a journal called the Journal of Medical Hypotheses. But you'll notice in that title, I mentioned obesity, but I will also mention anorexia. Because if you understand this way of stimulating appetite, well, you could actually use that to help stimulate appetites in people that don't have much appetite. Not so much in people with primary anorexia, but more people with secondary anorexia, so secondary to disease such as cancer or dementia. So my own personal example, my father has dementia. Very often he won't finish a meal. I give him a cottage pie. Very often he'll have a few mouthfuls and not want to eat anymore. But he loves cherry jam. So one spoonful of cherry jam, mix it in, and he'll down the whole lot without any problem. And that's something I do repeatedly with any meal he won't finish that contains a bit of fat. I'll add one spoonful of cherry jam, mix it in, and he'll eat the whole lot without any problem. And it's funny actually that so in all the talks I've ever listened to as a GP, all they talked about various weight loss clinics and so on, they never talk about this idea, this combination of sugar and fat as an idea or something to try and avoid. And in fact, if you think of all the successful diets around, one unifying factor in all diets that people buy into, even the Atkins diet, which is mainly avoiding carbohydrates, is each one has a low quantity of sugar-fat mixtures. So I only made this table today because I'm actually quite interested in looking at the ratio of sugar to fat. So I found one article on human milk and used the figures from that. And the amount of fat does range quite a lot, particularly if mother has just fed their baby. Then the milk straight away will have lower fat content. But on average, it varies. Between 3 and 5% of human milk will be fat. And the sugar to fat ratio will be somewhere between 1.4 and 2.4. I should have put those numbers the other way around. If you look at cow's milk, it would seem that actually human milk is quite a lot sweeter than cow's milk. These certainly got on average anyway. And I looked at Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and it seems there's a bit of a range. But the higher end of the sweeter Haagen-Dazs ice cream is pretty much in the middle of what you'd expect for human milk. And I'd be really interested to know whether or not the sweeter Haagen-Dazs ice cream sells better than the less sweet one. And I'm willing to bet it does, especially when you look at what Cadbury's milk chocolate works out as, which to that ratio of 1.9 is right bang in the middle of the ratio for human milk. I only actually looked that one up today, so I found that quite interesting. Whereas if you think of, well, what was Stone Age man have eaten? Fruits, meats, nuts, insects. But let's look at some fruit. An apple, pretty much just sugar. And the amount of sugar to fat ratio, 38 to 70, it's incomparable to the ratio that you would find in milk. And for chicken, all the sources I look at basically say sugar doesn't exist in chicken, which is very quite interesting. Although the fat content does vary hugely. So lean breast part of the chicken compared to one of the wings. Right. Yes. Yeah. But even so, the ratio is essentially naught. So again, so fruit and meats are essentially only going to be part of the homeostatic form of eating. It's not going to stimulate hedonistic eating. And as you quite rightly pointed out, when we were talking about the diet, say a Diet Coke, a sugar-free drink, it still tastes sweet. So taste is the important factor that is driving hedonistic eating. And without taste, we wouldn't have hedonistic eating. So what I find quite interesting is that as a GP, I'll notice that as people get older, obesity becomes less of a problem. If you go into a care home and you look at the body shape of the average 90-year-old, they tend to be much slimmer than, and it's not because they grew up 50 years ago. I think I assume it's probably because their sense of taste is less. But that's just a theory. I don't really agree with that, but certainly it could be that hedonistic eating is less common as you get older. Yeah.
So, is there been any noticeable trend with, like, for example, COVID and non-COVID, which famously reduces your sense of taste, and you like that?
Well, yeah, we just said that's one mechanism. I've not looked at any research on that, but you're quoting an example where people lose weight, people lose their sense of taste, and but with that, if they're going to the point where their weight is too low, then there would have to be a mechanism that interferes with homeostatic eating as well, which there may well be. But I don't know much about that. But what can we do about this? Did I miss out a slide? I don't think I did. Anyone got any thoughts about what we can do?
Eat less.
Sorry?
Eat less.
Yeah, but if your appetite is really high and you feel like you really need to have something to make you feel better, that's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, so yeah, protein is an appetite suppressant, yes. So, what's that, sorry? So you certainly wouldn't want to mix the two together. So for instance, you could. Yeah. So but if I give you an example, so you can still eat exactly the same thing on your plate. You don't need to change what you're eating. But you could just, so for instance, you could have a full roast dinner, roast Sunday meal with your turkey and your cranberry sauce. But you could eat the two separately. You could have your cranberry sauce and you could rinse your mouth with some water to cleanse your palate. And then you could have the turkey with some gravy so it's not dry. But at least you wouldn't be having the sweet cranberry sauce in the same mouthful that would stimulate the two senses together, the sensation of fat and the sensation of sugar in the same mouthful. And if you think of the impact of having someone having just one chocolate, so someone just offers you one chocolate, it's not the calories in that chocolate that's the problem, it's how it stimulates your appetite. Because it's not a natural food. Because prehistoric man wouldn't have been exposed to a sugar-fat combination after they've been weaned. And the food industry knows this. There's a reason why Cadbury's chocolate has ended up with the exact ratio of sugar to fat that human milk has, in my view. I don't think they've done it by design, but they have, for decades, they've had taste testers working out which bar of chocolate tastes the best. This is the other one, isn't it? Okay, so yeah, separate food and sugar. I think we might be losing the signal a little bit. Food with fat. But I can see what you're probably thinking. Who wants to eat much of that by itself? But you can still have it with a nice gravy or a sauce that doesn't have sugar in it. So you can still make it palatable and enjoyable to eat without having to have the combination. And then at least you'd be more in control of your own appetite. You wouldn't be sort of essentially tricked by the food industry into eating more than you want to eat. So you could eat in a homeostatic way rather than a hedonistic way. Saying that if you are used to eating in a hedonistic way, you need to try and find some alternative form of source of dopamine to give you that same good feeling. That might be exercise, it might be a hobby, it might, yeah, and so on. Next slide. And it's easy to kind of miss when miss mixture. So that's another example of a mixture you might not think of. The sugar in the raisins and the fat in the peanuts. There's a reason why people would rather eat that than raisins by themselves or peanuts by themselves. Why it probably sells better. Well, everyone likes roast peanuts, but peanuts that haven't been roasted and don't have salt on them, and they were near as palatable until you add some raisins to them. And you can make choices about the various percentages. So I normally tend to eat chocolate around about 89%, although as I mentioned earlier, I became addicted to chocolate with hazelnuts, where the cocoa percentage was about 50%. I say addicted, so same addiction that many people have. I could literally eat a whole bar in one sitting. Has anyone ever tried 99% Lindt chocolates? So 90% lemons. Okay. And how long did it take you to eat the whole bar?
Friend's bar, I only had one 2 squares.
Yeah.
It would have taken you a day. So all week.
Yes, I think I once bought one of those bars. They're 99% cocoa made by Lindt, and it literally took me 6 months to finish it. I used to have, like a sixth of one square, and it would just dry my mouth out instantly. Because I'm not suggesting you go quite that far, but I know from personal experience now I've switched to 85%, but one square or 2 at the most, it satisfies me. Whereas before I was literally wanting to have a whole bar. So you can make a simple choice, just have a higher percentage cocoa in the chocolate that you eat. And that one choice could help you eat less. You could decide on a different cooking method. So I mentioned about the caramelization of carbohydrates, the Maillard reaction. Or was it Maynard reaction? Maynard reaction. Maillard. And you can still have it with the boiled potato with a nice sauce or nice gravy that's not sweet. But at least you wouldn't be at the mercy of your the sugar-fat combination, which is essentially an addictive substance. And in a sense, once people understand this, they can start to forgive themselves a bit for overeating. Because understanding gives people power. So I get a little bit frustrated that people often don't have this understanding because they're missing out on gaining power over their appetites with essentially quite a simple idea. Next slide. So if anyone's got a smartphone on them, around about the time that I published that article, I made a survey online. So if you typed in on Google, smart survey, baby food, there were 7 questions on there. And anyone who's not been to this talk, and you want to help them learn to try and control their appetites, and they're open to the idea, you could always send them the link to it. But I've got the questions on here, which I'll show you briefly anyway. I'll try to. Here we go. So the first question essentially asks people to try and think of what Stone Age man might have eaten that contained both fat and sugar, because in my view, that if they can think of that one food, milk, I assume you, yeah, then to me, it explains why we might be addicted to fat mixed with sugar. At least Darwin might agree with it anyway. What else? So here, just kind of essentially these questions, I'm just running slowly through the ideas to help someone who may be completely new to the ideas. I'm just briefly showing you those. Try the next slide. Just asking whether it makes sense, whether people might agree that it essentially is a sugar-fat addiction. And giving people lots of examples, because unless you give people examples of various foods that they really enjoy and show to them that they are sugar fat combinations, why should anyone believe this idea? And the last slide, I've kind of forgotten all about this baby food free lifestyle idea or being fit for life, but one reason why I quite liked calling it baby food was in a way to label it for what it is. So the food industry all want us to eat like babies. Because if they can get us to eat like babies, they sell more food, they make more money. And you start realizing that, you can perhaps start eating less like babies and eating more like adults in prehistoric times. What's the sugar content?
The sugar content is
so if I look at you,
about 2 grams of sugar, but it's 19% calories.
so 19% is still low. Before the ratio was essentially 1-to-1 for calories, because fat has more calories in it than carbohydrates. So the ratio in terms of calories for human milk is essentially 1-to-1. So it's a good example, but it's still maybe, so it was 20% or 19%. That's still a ratio of 1 to 5, 1 to 4. And I guess also you have to think, well, is avocado is a common food, but and does it taste sweet? It's not just whether there's sugar in it. Do they taste sweet? Does an avocado taste sweet? So it's really what your brain perceives. Does it perceive it being sweet? Although you could also argue, does milk taste sweet? Probably not, but do we perceive it on a conscious level or a subconscious level? It's another question.
I think it's important for the baby to see it, but another that
Possibly.
the sense we don't know about how the sensory organs of a baby works.
Yeah, it's also possible that when we are weaned, as we grow older, we become less sensitive to sugar. So children tend to be more addicted to sugar than adults.
If it depends on the sugar and lactose, they might perceive lactose sweeter than we would. But it's not as sweet as sucrose or fructose. And because of we eating sweeter sugars, it's about numbing our sense of lactose. Well, the baby won't be having sweeter sugar, so that's why I think that just a theory.
But I mean, certainly children do eat a lot more sweets than adults do in general. So
cashews are 32% sugar and 39% fat. That's normal formulation.
but do they taste sweet? So what happens is in the brain. Yes, you're right. It's an interesting example. But at the same time, the main theory I'm proposing is what happens in the brain. So the sensation of sweetness and the sensation of fatness. Okay, so you have to have both. You have to have both the content and the sensation, or just the sensation. So obviously, I mentioned the sugar-free drink that has 0 calories, 0 sugar. The sensation is enough. So the sensation is still the most important factor. So finally, the title of the talk was actually about how could you reduce your weight, essentially. So I will just briefly mention other things that can help. So obviously, I mentioned the stress hormone cortisol, and if people are deprived of sleep, their cortisol levels will rise. If people are stressed, their cortisol levels will rise, and cortisol stimulates appetite. So of course, if you can try and have good sleep, reduce your stress, you will reduce your cortisol levels, you therefore reduce your appetite. Adequate fluid intake. So how many people know that the brain often confuses thirst with hunger? Anyone heard that before? Yeah. So if you don't drink enough fluids, you will feel more hungry. So and as well as feeling tired, having more chance of getting urine infections and so on.
If you work with other people, sometimes when I feel pain, but drink water to less angry, water.
Well, yeah, you're filling up your stomach, but also you're taking away the sensation of thirst, which is often confused with hunger.
Not getting thirst, but just think about the water. But when you're feeling angry, sometimes drink water, and then you feel less angry, just water.
Well, yeah, there were stretch receptors in the stomach, which release. I still can't pronounce it. Ghrelin from the stomach and reduce appetite in that way. Reducing the number of meals you have in a day, and avoiding snacking between meals is, most of you, I'm sure, are aware of that. But why would eating slowly, chewing your food well, why would that help you reduce your appetite? Yep.
Time for the hormone reactions to take place.
Yes, exactly. Time for the signal from your stomachs, from your stomach and so on to get to your brain to tell you you've eaten enough, so that homeostatic eating can switch off. Saying that though, that wouldn't have any effect on hedonistic eating, just on homeostatic eating. So if you're someone that eats primarily for hedonistic reasons, that's not going to really help, even though most doctors like myself will still advise that. And when it comes to fasting, so at the very least, so when I mentioned the 3 meals a day and not avoiding snacking, that does at least create a fast from tea time until breakfast. That's why we call it break fast. But of course, you can miss out one of those, either breakfast, lunch, or dinner, to create an even longer fast, and that would essentially be a form of intermittent fasting. And if you give yourself time to get used to fasting, and are able to take enough fluids in, which is the hardest thing when it comes to fasting, then you can go on to prolonged fasting, often with the support of your GP though, especially if you're diabetic or on medications. And has anyone tried prolonged fast? Anyone fast for more than 24 hours in their whole life? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 people in the room, only 8 people ever fasted longer than 24 hours. What's that, sorry? So the main reason for that would, unless you're diabetic, would you say you doubled your fluid intake during that fast? Because it's very, very hard to increase your fluid intake. So if you think a lot of your fluid we take in is from our food, not just moisture of it, but when we metabolize carbohydrates and fat and protein, it produces water. So if you suddenly stop eating, you have to literally drink twice as much. So I've done. So anyone fasted longer than 2 days or 48 hours or more? Anyone? No. Okay, so even though I didn't look like I maybe need to fast, I've done 5 fasts just as a kind of experiment. I did actually probably eat a little bit more than I should have during lockdown, probably gained half a stone, looking after my father, but I literally lost that half stone in just a few days by doing a 3-day fast. While doing that 3-day fast though, the hardest thing was taking the fluids. I did take vitamin pills and vitamin C, which I used to flavour some water as well. And on the 3rd day, I got some nausea, which apparently can be due to low blood sugar levels as well. So I wouldn't recommend jumping to that, but certainly from a personal point of view, I had no problems with doing 2-day fasts. But then people perhaps who aren't used to going even 12 hours without eating, I certainly recommend them not trying anything longer than 24 hours, because their bodies will not be used to it. Their bodies won't be used to breaking down fats. You probably have to upregulate various enzymes to break down fats, such as lipase. So that's pretty much the end of the talk.
You fasted, you drink water.
Yeah, so to be honest, you could probably drink anything you like as long as it doesn't have a lot of calories. So, if you think of a soluble vitamin C tablet, which has 1 gram of vitamin C, you could take a pinch of that, drop it in a pint of water, and the calories are negligible, but you'd still be able to taste it. So you're making the drink more palatable, you're making the fast therefore easier. You could have black coffee, or black tea, whatever is your favourite drink, which has no calories in it. You could even have the Diet Coke. Sorry. I thought you had a question.
Is it a question time?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Right. I've got two comments really. I think the medical side you've covered extremely comprehensively, but if you look, there are other sides to it. I mean, one is personal. Different people have different metabolism. I mean, I, for instance, never been troubled by overweight at all, but I can eat anything.
Did you get stressed a lot? You get really stressed in life? So it's possible that when you eat, you only eat what your body needs, and you don't eat purely for pleasure. You might enjoy your food, but you don't. If you went without a meal or without having some ice cream that you might have every evening, you wouldn't start feeling down or feel like you're withdrawing from the substance that you just had to have. You don't have a craving for food. Whereas some people who've had trauma in their life and need something to make them feel happier, they may need to eat in a different way, hedonistic eating.
That's my second point was, so is there an economic sort of element to this that sort of, way back in the 15th century, for instance, we probably ate a lot less and worked a lot more physically?
So if you talk about economics, very often food that contains both sugar and fat is actually often very cheap, which is part of the problem. But you're right, actually, it can be more expensive to have a diet that avoids those foods. Yeah. But equally, if you're eating less, hopefully you should be paying for less quantity. So.
And the clearer, so you're talking about Caucasians. I am Caribbean, but obviously from Africa. My family, some of my family are huge. And I've got a little cousin, she's 12. She's probably the size of Leah and the height of Leah. And she's 12.
So, and what are her favourite foods?
When she was born, her mum went to, this is a bit personal, she went shopping for a new bra because and she had to leave the shop because her child needed to be attached to her. A baby, newborn baby had to be attached to her almost all the time. This child ate like no other child ever.
So you actually raised one interesting thing. That is it possible that if breastfeeding is continued for maybe years?
No. This was a newborn baby.
Oh, right. So,
weeks, months
yeah.
old. Very, very tiny. She had to be attached to her. Did the mother have an experience of food scarcity? Okay. And he's very healthy and healthy. This child.
But that could be a form of stress as well, which would increase cortisol levels.
Yeah.
And of course, but the mechanism could involve increased levels of cortisol, because if you have a stressful environment and you prime someone, then they could have increased levels of cortisol as a result.
The reason I asked if there's a genetic, could be a different genetic element, because I've met uncles and other members of the family, and they're all huge.
Well, everything I mentioned, so you get polymorphisms of leptin genes, of all those, the amount of dopamine that someone might produce, the amount of dopamine receptors, every single thing will be varied according to genes and genetics.
There also be, if you lay fat cells down, you lay down fat cells when you're a child and you're a baby, they stay with you forever. Is that right?
Yes, from what I've known about it.
And therefore, if you lay enough fat cells down as an infant, the you are going to be
Of course, but also remember what I said, that leptin, which is the satiety hormone, is produced by fat cells. And when people become overweight, they become resistant to leptin. So they become resistant to feeling less hungry. So
I don't believe that other Americans are in my own family looking at these children who are they're tall. They're not just big, as in fat, but they are. My 13-year-old cousin is really, really tall.
I guess another factor is if everyone in the family is all eating the same amount and it's a social thing, then another factor will be that's just what they're all used to doing, eating those similar sized portions.
She started off eating when she was being weaned, and mum couldn't have the next spoon. She had to have 2 spoons, have the next spoon ready because she'd be bawling for more food, please. And this was when she was a baby. Not so that stress wasn't involved, wasn't any of those elements. This child was just hungry.
But has anyone, as a dietitian, ever looked at what they're actually eating?
I looked at what she was eating and I thought, would you be on seeing what she was eating, and this child was just looking up.
Couldn't.
I assume it was a genetic element.
Well,
When I met,
I don't know. I mean, if you just take simply leptin, for example, you could have leptin receptor gene defects. Then you could have a whole family unable to control their hunger.
but I'm not sure whether.
It's not it doesn't explain all obesity by any means, but it's something that is worth considering because it's normally ignored. It normally has it's normally never mentioned. So can I just chat back with that then, and then Jonathan's next. So
just a question when you were talking about the predominant eating. So in your experience, how easy is it to substitute that for something else? You mentioned about exercise and other things. Is that quite a straightforward transition, or is it dopamine?
I think, well, for me, I actually had a slight health scare. So that was enough then for me to think, well, what, I need to stop eating so much chocolate. And I simply went back to what I used to do, which is to eat 85% instead. To the point where I think I had a couple of squares the other day, but haven't had any for weeks. Whereas before that, I was probably having 3 bars of chocolate a week. So sometimes it does need a little bit of a trigger for you to make a change in your life. Sorry,
There's another thing. Also, foods. And society equals the weight gain. I mean, that's one theory. I don't know, the latest theories like and the Nova scale, like you've got group 1, which is best group scale, group 2, and the worst one is like 4, which is ultra. Is that another reason for increasing weight gain?
Well, yeah, if you read the British Medical Journal out last Friday, there's actually one of the articles there is all about ultra processed foods and about how that. But as part of ultra processed foods, high fat sugar combinations are quite common within that. And also, you heard of glycemic index, so how fast things get converted to sugar. So, and that will have an impact too, but by a different mechanism, more to do with the amount of insulin you release. Because insulin makes you lay down food stores. So if you get a large peak of glucose in your bloodstream, you release lots of insulin from your pancreas, and that lays down fat and carbohydrate stores. And that's different from appetite. So I'm really focusing on appetite, not insulin. And in that respect, it's a different mechanism. But you're right, ultra-processed food, it's more likely very often to lead to spikes of sugar in the bloodstream and have a high glycemic index. Although it's funny, some foods that you might think are healthy, like say a jacket potato, actually have a higher glycemic index than you think. So most jacket potatoes have the same glycemic index as a Mars bar. Yeah. But so yes, they will lead to a high peak of glucose in your bloodstream and lots of insulin, and thereby lots of insulin that will be more likely to form fats. But which of those two, jacket potato or the Mars bar, would stimulate hedonistic eating? The Mars bar. So if you think I actually had 3 jacket potatoes 2 days ago. I ate 2 huge jacket potatoes in one sitting. And I ate the third one yesterday as a snack. So although I was exposed to a huge peak of glucose, I must say, actually, today, for instance, I've not had breakfast. I've not eaten since breakfast, but I've not felt hungry. But I had a jacket potato last night, quite late.
I mean, another interesting way I found controlling weight was one of the reps came out. I was doing a trial with the sensors, the freestyle. So for a couple of weeks, and you get your feedback on the glucose level. I was horrified at some of the foods eating spike in glucose.
Yeah.
Recently, I was suddenly changed my habits. You know, I'm not diabetic. Just
Yeah, and glucose is toxic. It does damage cells. Sorry. What did I have last night? I actually just had some mature cheddar and just mashed it all up and mixed it all up and grabbed some ground pepper. And that was essentially just a quick, lazy meal. I'm not saying copy what I eat by any means, because I know most of you probably eat more healthily than I do. But yeah, anyway. Sorry, you had a question.
Did we actually establish postal babies like our house knows, you know, you have a slightly positive, like, oh, isn't it sweet?
I never actually tasted it, so thank you for telling me.
Well, I know the question.
Which is exactly what that table shows, isn't it? Right. It shows that it is sweeter than cow's milk.
Sounds like something called Prader-Willi syndrome, but I think there are other associated things with that.
That's pretty rare, and normally
It is.
it's truncal obesity, dwarfism, and prolapsed umbilical hernia very often as well, and other disorders. That's a pretty rare genetic disorder. It's far more common to have, say, a leptin polymorphism that might influence the amount that you might eat. Prader-Willi syndrome.
No.
Oh, leptin polymorphisms. Oh yeah. We're all born with our own leptin genes, and they'll all be different, slightly different.
What else does the need to have a curry
We should probably start with the code hypothesis. But see, if you think that alcohol, most of the hypoglycemia from the alcohol probably stimulates appetite. So that's probably more homeostatic eating. But your body realizes that the brain is in danger from not only the alcohol content, but also the low blood sugar, and drives you to get something that will bring the blood sugar back up. That's any more questions?
I'm just intrigued to saw that shared about this second baked potato.
Two large chocolate potatoes.
Police grown choice style for second baked potato.
It was more that I couldn't be bothered to back in the fridge. So but I must say that the last part of it I didn't actually want to eat, just I couldn't be bothered. I would say laziness. But as a consequence of that, I've not wanted to eat all day. So my homeostasis just kicks in. So, and that, from a personal point of view, that's something I've always been able to do. So I can go somewhere and go to an eatery, can place, and just not bother eating the next 2 days. Yeah, because I'm not recommending other people do that. I'm just saying that's for me as an individual. I cocoa mentality.
Chocolate.
Well, one would have been enough, but I cooked two and decided I'd just eat two. But it wasn't hedonistic eating. If anything, it was the opposite.
Cooked two. Therefore, ate two.
Well, I cooked three. I put one back in the fridge.
Why didn't you cook half and then have the other?
You're right. I probably should have done that, but then one half might have dried out. Sorry, another question.
Green babies on breast milk with like bananas and stuff. They're sweet and got fat and energy and stuff. But banana, for example, is very satisfying food. It's not like you go back and eat more and more bananas. So why is it that chocolate has that power over a banana?
Sorry, no one weans babies onto chocolate, so I was trying to.
No, I mean with a banana, you'd replace like the breast milk in the early days of weaning with banana, crushed banana, the same kind of sugar.
This
To appeal.
I'm
But I'm saying
not
as
heard
an
that.
adult, banana's quite satisfying
Yeah.
meal. It's not like you have loads of them. But chocolate, as you say, you want more and more.
I mean, I think there's almost no fat in bananas as far as I'm aware.
No fat in them.
Well, very little as far as I was aware, although I'm sure my friends over here, maybe my friends over here can look up the fat contents of bananas. But generally, most fruit doesn't have much fat as far as I was aware in it. Oh yeah, there's lots of sugar in it. Yeah, it tastes sweet as well. And what we were saying earlier about babies perhaps having a higher propensity to eat sweet foods and a higher a lower taste threshold, perhaps with sweetness. means they do like sweet things. So I think my microphone keeps turning off. So salt is another thing that helps stimulate appetite. So, for instance, it's quite common to inject chickens with a salty liquid, saline, to make people eat more. If I was selling chickens, I'd see if I could get away with actually injecting not only some salt but also some sugar as well. I'm pretty sure I could probably sell more, but that's probably illegal, right? Yes, yeah, salt stimulates appetite. But if you then put some tomato ketchup on it, you've got your sugar as well.
Salt, sugar, fat, just like the biscuits.
Well, I guess when they have all their taste testers, they're going to choose. They're going to choose the food that's most addictive.
Salt, fat,
It probably is, yes. But I was really trying to focus purely on fat and sugar thing, and not confuse things by adding in salt as well, which is yet another factor that the food industry loves to use. We should rightly point out. Any other questions?
More questions, Stephen? Really interesting, brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. Very insightful. Give you a round of applause.